Have you ever wondered why World War II happened? What set the world on fire? Our story begins at the end of the first global conflict, World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June of 1919, was intended to establish peace. However, it laid the groundwork for a second, even more devastating conflict. You see, the treaty placed the entire blame for the war on Germany and Austria-Hungary, also known as the Central Powers. It demanded hefty reparations, territorial losses, and severe restrictions on their military capabilities. This punitive peace treaty brought about a severe economic depression in Germany. The country's economy was already strained by the costs of war, and now, with the burden of reparations, it collapsed entirely. Hyperinflation ran rampant, with a loaf of bread costing billions of German marks at its peak. This economic instability created fertile ground for the rise of extreme nationalism. The German people, humiliated and impoverished, longed for a return to greatness. They rallied behind charismatic leaders who promised to restore their nation's honor and prosperity. Among these leaders was a man named Adolf Hitler, whose National Socialist or Nazi party capitalized on the public's discontent. Meanwhile, the League of Nations, established to prevent such a conflict from happening again, proved ineffective. It lacked the authority and the means to enforce its decisions. The great powers were reluctant to get involved in international disputes, preferring a policy of appeasement. This failure to maintain peace allowed aggressive nations like Germany, Italy, and Japan to pursue their expansionist ambitions unchecked. All these factors, the harsh Treaty of Versailles, the economic depression in Germany, the rise of extreme nationalism, and the failure of the League of Nations, were the catalysts that set the world on the path to another war. So, the seeds of conflict were sown, and they would soon grow into a destructive storm. In the midst of this turmoil, one man rose to power, feeding off the anger and despair of the German people: Adolf Hitler. A charismatic speaker and a manipulator of the masses, Hitler became the embodiment of the German people's frustration and their desire for a stronger nation. Amidst the economic and political instability that followed World War I, the Nazi Party, under Hitler's leadership, began to gain traction. Hitler and the Nazi Party propagated an ideology that was deeply rooted in the ideals of racial purity and territorial expansion. They blamed Germany's downfall on the Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles, stirring up a potent brew of hatred and nationalism. This ideology found a willing audience in a populace desperate for change and eager for a savior. As Hitler consolidated his power, he began a massive campaign of rearmament in stark violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Tanks, planes, and submarines were built in secret factories, while the German army grew in size and strength. This rearmament was not just about rebuilding Germany's military might. It was a clear signal of Hitler's intentions. The world watched, uneasy but largely inactive, as Hitler continued to defy the treaty. In 1938, Hitler annexed Austria, his birthplace, in the Anschluss. This was followed by the Munich Agreement, where Britain and France, desperate to avoid another war, allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, a part of Czechoslovakia. These acts were more than land grabs. They were assertions of power, demonstrations of the world's unwillingness to stop Hitler, and rehearsals for the war that was to come. Each victory, each unchecked act of aggression emboldened Hitler and the Nazi Party. Hitler was now poised to plunge the world into chaos. His actions had set the stage for the deadliest conflict in human history, World War II. The world had watched and waited, hoping peace would prevail. But as we now know, hope was not enough to stop the march of Hitler's war machine. While Hitler was consolidating power, the rest of the world watched with a mix of fear and complacency. The world was on a precipice, a delicate balance teetering on the edge of a chasm filled with the horrors of war. In Britain and France, a policy of appeasement was adopted. They hoped to curb Hitler's ambitions through diplomatic means, offering concessions rather than standing up to his increasingly aggressive actions. This policy, however, was akin to feeding a hungry beast, only increasing its appetite. Hitler interpreted it as weakness, and it only emboldened him further. Instead of preventing war, this policy of appeasement was inadvertently paving the way for the very thing it sought to avoid. Meanwhile, in the East, another pact was being formed. Germany and the Soviet Union, two nations seemingly at ideological odds, signed a non-aggression pact. This pact was a strategic move by both nations to buy time and avoid immediate conflict. But under the surface, it was another sign that the world was inching closer to war. On the other side of the globe, Japan was also flexing its imperial muscles. It had already invaded Manchuria in 1931, and its eyes were set on further expansion in Asia. The Western powers watched, but their response was limited. They were too preoccupied with the growing threat in Europe and hoped to avoid provoking Japan. This lack of a strong international response only encouraged Japan to continue its aggressive expansion. These were the conditions that pushed the world towards the precipice of war. A policy of appeasement that failed to curb Hitler's ambition, a pact between two unlikely allies that was more about strategy than friendship, and a distant nation expanding its territories unopposed. The stage was set, the players were ready, and the world was on the brink of a devastating war. Each of these actions and inactions, each decision made in the halls of power across the globe, was a step towards the edge. And once the world tipped over, there would be no turning back. The spark that ignited the powder keg was the German invasion of Poland. As the month of September in 1939 dawned, the world watched in horror as Hitler's forces stormed across the Polish border. This was no mere territorial dispute or diplomatic tussle. This was a full-scale, unprovoked attack that shattered the fragile peace that Europe had been precariously maintaining. From the Baltic Sea to the Carpathian Mountains, the German war machine swept across Poland. An audacious display of military might, the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, was unleashed. The Polish forces fought valiantly, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer power and speed of the German onslaught. Cities fell, one after another, and within a month, Poland was under German control. In response to this blatant act of aggression, Britain and France, Poland's allies, had no choice but to act. They declared war on Germany, honoring their pact with Poland and marking the start of World War II. Yet, this was not an isolated European conflict. This war would soon ensnare nations across the globe, from the sands of North Africa to the icy waters of the Atlantic, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the vast expanses of the Soviet Union. The flames of war spread, consuming everything in their path. As the conflict expanded, neutrality became a luxury few could afford. Nations were forced to choose sides, to join the Allies or the Axis powers. It was a time of alliances and betrayals, of grand strategies and desperate gambles. And at the heart of it all was a simple yet devastating truth. The world was at war. Alliances were formed and broken, territories were won and lost, and millions of lives were forever changed. The world was caught in the grip of a war like no other, a war that would redefine the very concept of conflict and leave an indelible mark on human history. And just like that, the world was once again consumed by war. The echoes of those gunshots still reverberate today, a stark reminder of the cost of ambition and the price of freedom. World War II was a catastrophic event that reshaped the world. In the aftermath of this devastating conflict, the world was left in ruins. Entire cities had been leveled, economies were shattered, and the human cost was unfathomable. An estimated 70 million people lost their lives, representing almost 4% of the world's population at that time. This war touched every corner of the globe, leaving no community unscathed. The economic cost was equally staggering. Billions upon billions of dollars were spent on the war effort, plunging many nations into deep debt. The destruction of infrastructure further compounded these financial woes, making recovery a slow and grueling process. Yet, amidst the rubble and despair, hope emerged. The world banded together in an unprecedented show of unity to form the United Nations in 1945. This international body was established with the aim of preventing such a devastating war from ever happening again. It sought to promote peace, foster international cooperation, and protect human rights. This marked a significant shift in international relations as nations recognized the importance of working together for the common good. The lessons learned from World War II are numerous and profound. We learned about the destructive power of hatred, prejudice, and unchecked aggression. We saw firsthand the horrors of genocide and the devastating effects of nuclear warfare. But we also learned about the resilience of the human spirit, the power of unity, and the importance of standing up against tyranny. These lessons continue to shape our world today, influencing our policies, our actions, and our understanding of human nature. They remind us of the devastating cost of conflict and the importance of pursuing peace at all costs. World War II was a grim reminder of the devastating cost of conflict, a lesson we must never forget. We carry these lessons with us, etched in our collective memory as we strive to create a world free from the horrors of war. They serve as a stark reminder of our past, a guide for our present, and a beacon for our future.